The night in Rocheport had a silence that wasn't of peace. It was the kind of quiet that settled over Missouri in late summer of 1864, when even the crickets seemed to know better than to make noise. The air hung thick and hot, carrying the smell of burned fields from 3 miles east where Union cavalry had torched another farmstead that morning. The darkness felt heavy, oppressive, like something waiting to strike. Inside Elijah Garrett's farmhouse, lamplight flickered through windows that faced north toward the Kansas border. The small dwelling sat isolated among rolling hills, surrounded by oak trees that had witnessed 2 years of guerrilla warfare turn neighbors into executioners and supper tables into battlegrounds. This was the Missouri frontier in the 4th year of war, where the conflict between North and South had devolved into something far more personal and brutal than Gettysburg or Shiloh ever dreamed of being. Bill Anderson sat at that table, a fork halfway to his mouth, his dark eyes constantly moving to the windows and door. At 24 years old, he looked 40, his face weathered by violence and grief, his movements carrying the coiled tension of a man who expected death at every moment. He wore a dark coat despite the heat, revolvers hidden beneath it, boots still on his feet, though most men would have removed them for comfort. His wife Martha sat across from him, her face drawn with worry that had become permanent. She knew what her husband had become, what the war had carved from the laughing young man she'd married. This wasn't Bill's home. He had no home anymore, not since Union forces burned his family's property and imprisoned his sisters. One of those sisters, Josephine, had died trying to escape custody when the building collapsed. The other, Mary, followed her into death from injuries sustained in the same incident. Bill carried their memories like open wounds, and he carried something else too, scalps from Union soldiers, dangling from his saddle outside, grim trophies that announced exactly who and what Bloody Bill Anderson had become. Listen here, this story gets darker. Hit like and subscribe if you ain't already. You won't believe what Anderson did next. Bill never stayed anywhere more than one night. He rotated locations, trusted almost no one, and always had escape routes planned before he sat down to eat. Elijah Garrett's farmhouse had seemed safe because Garrett was a sympathizer, a man whose sons fought for the Confederacy, whose farm had hidden guerrillas before. But safety was an illusion on the border, a fantasy men died believing in. Tonight, Bill had allowed himself this moment of peace because Martha had begged him. She wanted to see her husband eat one meal like a normal man, wanted to pretend for just an hour that they had a life beyond violence and running. Jesse James sat at the table too, just 17 years old, watching Bill's every move with the intensity of a student studying a master. The boy was learning how to survive in a war that killed most guerrillas before they reached 20. Outside, positioned with tactical precision, Bill's most trusted men held watch. Archie Clement crouched in Garrett's barn loft, his small frame nearly invisible in the shadows, a rifle across his knees and those cold, dead eyes scanning the northern approach. Archie was barely 5 feet tall, but killed without hesitation or remorse, a rabid animal in human form who followed Bill with absolute loyalty. Jim Anderson, Bill's younger brother, watched the southern trail from a copse of trees, his horse ready beside him. Frank James observed from the tree line with fresh mounts prepared, his mind already calculating angles of escape and attack. Dave Poole, silent as death itself, patrolled the perimeter, a wraith who moved through darkness like he'd been born to it. But 3 miles away, in Boonville Garrison, Major Nathan Cross was also preparing. The Union cavalry commander had spent 6 weeks tracking Bill Anderson, obsessed with capturing or killing the man he held responsible for his brother's death at Centralia. Cross had lost his brother to bushwhacker bullets, had identified the body by the ring on his severed finger, had listened to survivors describe how Anderson's men showed no mercy. Unlike other Union officers who feared Anderson, Cross had studied him. He knew Bill's patterns, his associates, his few remaining connections to family. Cross understood that Anderson's one weakness was sentimentality. The man who scalped enemies and burned towns alive still risked death to see his wife, still carried the memory of dead sisters like sacred relics. That vulnerability was what Cross intended to exploit. For weeks, Cross had squeezed information from captured sympathizers, paid informants, tortured men until they revealed hiding places and safe houses. He'd assembled 40 hand-picked soldiers, veterans who wouldn't break when facing Anderson's reputation. These weren't green recruits who'd run at the first shot. These were hardened men who'd seen combat and understood that capturing Bloody Bill Anderson would make them legends. Tonight, Cross had his moment. A local farmer, desperate and terrified, had sent word that Bill Anderson was having supper at Garrett's homestead. The informant's son carried the message, a boy of 16 named Thomas Garrett, who rode fast toward Boonville with a note that would bring 40 armed soldiers down on his father's farm. The boy was terrified but believed he was protecting his family. Union forces had made it clear that harboring bushwhackers meant execution for entire households. What Thomas Garrett didn't know was that Frank James had been watching the roads. Frank, paranoid and brilliant, had seen the boy riding hard toward Boonville at dusk, had tracked him through the gathering darkness, and had cut him off 2 miles from the garrison. The confrontation was brief and brutal. Frank's revolver pressed against the boy's temple, and Thomas broke immediately, sobbing out the truth. His father had betrayed Bill's location. Union soldiers were coming. Major Cross planned a dawn raid. Frank didn't kill the boy. Instead, he tied him to a tree, gagged him, and rode hard back to Garrett's farmhouse. He arrived just as Bill was finishing his supper, just as Martha was smiling at her husband for the first time in weeks, just as Jesse was asking Bill about guerrilla tactics at Baxter Springs. Frank burst through the door, breathing hard, and threw the captured note on the table. The paper was crumpled, stained with the boy's sweat and tears. Bill read it slowly, his face betraying nothing, though his knuckles went white gripping the page. The note was simple and damning. Anderson at Garrett Farm tonight. 40 men sufficient. Dawn raid. Leave none alive. Martha's face went pale. Jesse's hand moved instinctively to his revolver. Bill looked up at Frank, then at the window where lamplight made them all perfect targets, then at his wife's terrified eyes. The silence stretched long and terrible. Finally Bill spoke, his voice cold and flat. "How long we got?" 2 hours, Frank said. "Maybe less if they push hard." Martha grabbed Bill's arm. "We run, right now. We scatter and we run." But Bill was already thinking 3 steps ahead, already seeing not a trap, but an opportunity. Major Cross had committed his best men to this ambush, had focused every resource on this one moment. The Union commander expected to find a complacent target having supper with family, a sentimental guerrilla caught off guard. Cross was about to learn what every other Union officer in Missouri had learned the hard way. Bill Anderson was never caught off guard, never unprepared, and never more dangerous than when someone threatened the few people he had left to lose. Bill looked at his wife and spoke words that sent ice through everyone present. "They want to catch me at supper. Then we'll set a table they'll remember." Martha Anderson stood from the table so fast her chair fell backward, clattering against the wooden floor like a gunshot. Her eyes blazed with fear and fury as she grabbed Bill's arm hard enough to hurt. "No, absolutely not. We're leaving, Bill. Right now." Bill looked at his wife with something that might have been tenderness if his eyes weren't already calculating angles and distances. "Martha, listen. I've been listening for 2 years. Her voice cracked. "I listened when they told me your sisters were dead. I listened when you came home covered in other men's blood. I listened every time you promised this would be the last raid, the last fight. I'm done listening, Bill. We're running." Jesse James watched the exchange with wide eyes, his hand still resting on his revolver. At 17, he understood violence, but not yet the terrible mathematics of guerrilla warfare, the calculations that turned disadvantage into victory, that made 40 armed soldiers into dead men. Frank James stood by the door, his face grim. He knew what Bill was thinking because he'd seen that look before, right before impossible victories at Centralia and Fayette. Frank didn't like it, but he understood it. Bill Anderson didn't run from fights. He turned them into slaughterhouses. Bill stood slowly, his movements deliberate, and took Martha's hands in his. His palms were calloused from rains and gunmetal, scarred from 2 years of warfare. "Major Cross came for you, Martha. He came to use you against me, to trap me through you. If we run tonight, he'll know it works. He'll know my weakness. Every Union officer from here to Kansas City will come for you next time. Then we leave Missouri," Martha said desperately. "We go to Texas, to Arkansas, anywhere but here. And abandon everyone who's helped us? Everyone who's hidden us, fed us, kept us alive?" Bill's voice hardened. "Elijah Garrett betrayed us because he's terrified. How many others you think will do the same if they know I run from fights? How many families you think survive when guerrillas can't protect them?" Jim Anderson entered through the back door, rifle in hand, having heard Frank's arrival. He looked at his older brother and saw the decision already made. "We're staying, ain't we?" "We're staying," Bill confirmed. He released Martha's hands and moved to the window, careful to stay to the side where lamplight wouldn't silhouette him. "Frank, how many men Cross bringing?" The note said 40. "All veterans. Cross's best." Jesse whistled low. "We got maybe 15 here, counting everyone." 14, Bill corrected. "Dave Poole's out on perimeter. Archie's in the barn. You, Frank, Jim, me, Jesse, Cole Younger arrived during supper. He's in the smokehouse. That's 6 inside. George Todd and his boys are camped 3 miles south, but we can't reach them in time. So we're outnumbered damn near 3 to 1, Jim said flatly, against Union cavalry who actually know how to fight. Bill smiled, and it was a terrible thing to see. Cold and predatory, the expression of a man who'd made peace with violence long ago. They know how to fight battles, Jim. We know how to fight wars. There's a difference. He moved to the table and swept the supper dishes aside, pulling a crude map from his coat pocket. The paper showed Garrett's farm, the surrounding terrain, approaches from all directions. Bill had drawn it 2 days ago when he'd first scouted the location. He never went anywhere without mapping escape routes and defensive positions first. Cross will come from the north, Bill said, his finger tracing the main road from Boonville. It's the fastest route, and he thinks he's got surprise. He'll surround the house, position men at every exit, then call for surrender. Standard military doctrine. Contain, intimidate, capture, or kill. Frank leaned over the map. He'll put his best shots on the tree line here and here, covering the doors. Probably station men at the barn to prevent us from reaching horses. Maybe a reserve force on the road to cut off retreats south. That's exactly what he'll do, Bill agreed, which means we know precisely where every one of his men will be before they even arrive. Jesse's eyes widened as understanding dawned. We let them surround us. Then we're surrounding them. Now you're thinking like a guerrilla, Bill said. Cross expects to find a target. Instead, he's gonna walk into a killing field. Martha sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. She knew she'd lost this argument before it began. Bill wasn't just her husband anymore. He was Bloody Bill Anderson, and that man didn't run from Union soldiers. That man turned every disadvantage into enemy corpses. Bill's voice softened slightly as he addressed her. Martha, you're leaving. Right now. Jim's gonna take you and 2 men south to the Creek Hollow. Wait there until dawn. If we're not back by first light, Frank will find you and get you to Texas. If you're not back by dawn, you're dead, Martha said bitterly. Then I'm dead, Bill replied simply. But at least I died making Cross pay for coming after my family. Martha stood, tears streaming down her face, and slapped her husband hard across the cheek. The sound cracked through the room like a whip. Bill didn't flinch, didn't react, just stood there and took it. She slapped him again, then collapsed against his chest, sobbing. Bill held her, his face finally showing something besides cold calculation, grief, love, and the terrible knowledge that this might be the last time he held his wife. I love you, Martha whispered against his coat. I hate what you've become, but I love you. I know, Bill said quietly. I hate it too. Jim Anderson cleared his throat. I'll get the horses ready. Martha, gather what you need. We leave in 10 minutes. As Martha went to collect her few possessions, Bill turned back to the map. His tactical mind was already racing, sorting through possibilities and probabilities. Frank, take Jesse and get to that ravine west of the house. It's got perfect cover and clear sight lines to the main approach. Soon as shooting starts, you hit them from the side. How many we expecting to kill? Jesse asked, his voice steady despite his youth. All of them, Bill said flatly. Cross came to kill my wife. I don't take prisoners from men like that. Frank nodded grimly. I'll position Jesse where he can shoot without being seen. Boy's a natural with a rifle. Archie stays in the barn loft, Bill continued. He's got the best vantage point and he don't miss. Jim, soon as Martha's safe, you and Cole circle around behind Cross's approach. When they commit to surrounding the house, you block their retreat. Anyone tries to run, you kill them. What about you? Frank asked. Bill looked at the lamplit window, at his own shadow moving across the glass. I'm gonna sit right here at this table, visible as Sunday church. Cross needs to see me, needs to think his trap worked. I'm the bait that keeps them focused forward while you tear them apart from 3 sides. That's suicide, Jesse protested. You'll be the first target when shooting starts. No, Bill corrected. I'll be the last thing Cross sees before he dies. I want him to know he got outplayed. I want him to die understanding that he killed his own men by underestimating who he was hunting. Dave Poole materialized in the doorway like a ghost, making everyone jump despite themselves. The silent guerrilla had a talent for moving without sound, for appearing and disappearing like smoke. He looked at Bill and spoke in his rare, quiet voice. Riders coming. Still 3 miles out, but moving steady. 40 men, maybe more. How long? Bill asked. Hour and a half. They're taking it slow, trying to stay quiet. Bill checked his revolvers, spinning the cylinders to verify each was fully loaded. 6 shots each, 12 total, and he carried 4 more loaded cylinders in his pockets. 72 rounds without reloading. Dave, you take the northeast corner by the fence line. Anyone breaks from the main group, you drop them quiet. No shots unless shooting's already started. Dave nodded and vanished back into the darkness. Martha emerged with a small bag, her face composed now, tears dried. She looked at Bill one last time, memorizing his face, as if she'd never see it again. Maybe she wouldn't. "You better come back to me, Bill Anderson." "I'll try," he promised, though they both knew promises meant nothing in war. Jim led Martha out the back door, moving quickly toward where horses waited in shadow. Cole Younger went with them, his revolvers ready. Within minutes, they'd disappeared into the darkness, heading south toward safety. Bill watched them go, then turned back to his remaining men. Frank, Jesse, Archie Clement, who'd come down from the barn, and 2 other guerrillas whose names would be lost to history but whose loyalty was absolute. "Cross thinks he's hunting me," Bill said quietly. "But tonight, we're hunting him. Every man who rides with that bastard is here to kill my wife, burn this farm, and put my head on a pike in Boonville. They chose this. They chose to make it personal. Now they're gonna learn what personal really means on the Missouri border." Archie Clement smiled, and it was the expression of a rabid dog seeing meat. "How you want the bodies left?" "However they fall," Bill replied. "But Cross I want alive until the end. I want him to watch his men die. I want him to understand exactly what he brought down on himself." The guerrillas dispersed to their positions, Frank and Jesse to the ravine, Archie back to the barn loft, the others to concealment points that would create devastating crossfire. Bill remained at the table, adjusting the lamp so his silhouette would be clear through the window. He poured himself whiskey, drank it slowly, and waited. 3 miles north, Major Nathan Cross rode at the head of 40 Union cavalry, confident and eager. He'd dreamed of this moment for months, capturing Bloody Bill Anderson, avenging his brother, becoming the hero who ended Missouri's most notorious guerrilla. Cross had planned everything perfectly. His men were veterans, his intelligence solid, his tactics sound. What Cross didn't know was that his intelligence came from a terrified farmer whose son had been captured. What Cross didn't understand was that Bill Anderson had survived 2 years of guerrilla warfare not through luck or brutality, but through paranoia refined into tactical brilliance. What Cross couldn't imagine was that the trap he'd set so carefully had been turned inside out, transformed into a slaughterhouse waiting for Union soldiers to walk into its jaws. The night remained silent as death itself. In the farmhouse, Bill Anderson sat at the supper table, clearly visible through the window, appearing exactly as Cross expected, complacent, unsuspecting, vulnerable. But Bill's hands rested on revolvers beneath the table. His eyes watched the darkness beyond the lamplight, and his mind counted down the minutes until 40 men learned that on the Missouri border, appearance and reality were separated by blood and bullets. 1 hour remained until the slaughter began. Major Nathan Cross raised his fist, halting 40 mounted soldiers a quarter mile from Garrett's farmhouse. The night wrapped around them like a shroud, thick and moonless, perfect for surrounding an unsuspecting target. Cross felt his heart pounding with anticipation. This was the moment he'd worked toward for 6 weeks, the culmination of endless tracking and planning. Tonight, his brother's death would be avenged. "Dismount," Cross whispered, his voice barely carrying to the men nearest him. "We go in on foot, silent as church mice. Marksmen to the tree line, riflemen spread around the perimeter, cavalry ready to block southern escape route." Sergeant William Danvers, a thick-necked veteran of Shiloh, leaned close. "House is still lit, Major. Looks like our intelligence was solid. Targets inside, probably finishing supper." Cross smiled in the darkness. Intelligence was solid because he'd squeezed it from captured sympathizers, because he'd paid informants, because he'd made it abundantly clear that harboring Bloody Bill Anderson meant death for entire families. Fear was a weapon as effective as bullets, and Cross had wielded it masterfully. "Remember," Cross said, addressing his assembled soldiers, "Anderson is dangerous, but he's just one man. We have 40. We have surprise. We have every advantage. Surround the house, cover every exit, and when I call for surrender, be ready. He might come out shooting." "What if he's got men with him?" Danvers asked. "Then we kill them too," Cross replied coldly. "No prisoners tonight. Anderson and anyone fool enough to stand with him dies here. This ends tonight, boys. The nightmare of Bloody Bill Anderson ends at this farmhouse." The soldiers nodded, faces grim with determination. These were hardened men who'd seen guerrilla warfare's brutality, who'd buried friends killed by bushwhacker ambushes, who wanted revenge as badly as their commander. They moved forward in practiced silence, spreading out to encircle Garrett's farmhouse like a noose tightening. From his position in the barn loft, Archie Clement watched them come. His small frame crouched motionless among hay bales, rifle resting across his knees, those dead shark eyes tracking every movement. Archie counted soldiers as they positioned themselves. 8 to the tree line north, 10 spreading east along the fence, 6 moving west toward the ravine, the rest forming a reserve line on the road. 40 men, just as Frank had said. Archie's lips pulled back in something resembling a smile. 40 men walking into hell without knowing it. In the ravine west of the house, Frank James lay prone next to Jesse, both men invisible in the darkness and tall grass. Frank's hand rested on Jesse's shoulder, keeping the young guerrilla calm and steady. Jesse's breathing came fast with nervous energy, but his hands were rock steady on his rifle. "Wait for Bill's signal," Frank whispered. "Don't shoot until you hear Archie's first shot. Then aim careful and shoot true. These boys are veterans. They'll shoot back hard once it starts." "I'm ready," Jesse breathed, his eyes tracking Union soldiers moving past their position, completely unaware they were flanked. "I know you are," Frank said. "Your brother would be proud." To the south, Jim Anderson and Cole Younger crouched in darkness, having circled behind Cross's approach route. They'd positioned themselves perfectly to block retreat, close enough to strike, but far enough to remain undetected. Jim checked his revolvers for the third time, then looked at Cole. "Bill's either crazy or brilliant," Jim muttered. "He's both," Cole replied. "That's why we follow him." Dave Poole was a shadow at the northeast fence line, so still he seemed part of the landscape itself. He'd already marked 3 Union soldiers in his mind, their positions, their weapons, how they moved. When shooting started, those 3 would die in seconds. Dave never missed, never hesitated, never felt anything resembling mercy. Inside the farmhouse, Bill Anderson sat at the supper table in full view of the window. He'd positioned himself perfectly, clearly visible, apparently relaxed, the picture of an unsuspecting target. The lamp behind him cast his shadow large against the wall, making him an obvious silhouette. Bill's hands rested flat on the table, but beneath it, 2 revolvers lay across his thighs, cocked and ready. He watched the darkness beyond the lamplight, his peripheral vision catching movement as Union soldiers crept closer. Bill's heartbeat remained slow and steady. This was what he did: turned fear into fuel, transformed disadvantage into slaughter. He'd done it at Centralia when he massacred 100 Union soldiers. He'd done it at Fayette when he burned the garrison to ash. Tonight would be no different. Bill thought of Martha, safe in the creek hollow. He thought of Josephine and Mary, his sisters whose deaths had carved out his humanity and replaced it with cold vengeance. He thought of Major Nathan Cross, riding confidently toward what he believed was victory. The Major was about to learn a lesson every Union officer in Missouri eventually learned. Bloody Bill Anderson was always 3 steps ahead, always more dangerous than anyone imagined, and absolutely without mercy for men who threatened his family. Major Cross and Sergeant Danvers crept forward, using the oak trees for cover, until they could see the farmhouse clearly. Lamplight glowed warm through windows. Movement inside, a figure at the table, distinct and unmistakable. Cross's breath caught in his throat. "Anderson, right there. Trapped. Perfect," Cross whispered. "Absolutely perfect. Signal the men to tighten the perimeter. I want every exit covered before I announce surrender." Danvers' hand signaled to surrounding soldiers. They closed in silently, forming a complete circle around the farmhouse. Riflemen took position in the tree line, weapons aimed at doors and windows. Cavalry blocked the southern route, every angle covered, every escape route sealed. It was textbook military execution: surround, contain, eliminate. Cross stepped forward into a small clearing 30 yards from the farmhouse's front door. He drew his revolver, feeling its weight, savoring this moment. His brother's face flashed in his mind. Samuel Cross, 23 years old, butchered at Centralia massacre, his body mutilated beyond recognition. Tonight, Samuel would be avenged. "Bill Anderson!" Cross shouted, his voice carrying through the night. "This is Major Nathan Cross, Union Army. You're surrounded by 40 armed soldiers. There's no escape. Come out with your hands visible and you'll be taken prisoner. Resist and you'll die in that house with anyone fool enough to stand with you." Inside the farmhouse, Bill Anderson smiled. It was the last smile of a sane man before violence transformed him into something else entirely. He stood slowly, making sure his silhouette remained visible in the window. Then, in one fluid motion, he dropped below the window frame and roared, "Now!" Archie Clement's rifle shot split the night like thunder. A Union soldier in the tree line jerked backward, dead before he hit ground. That single shot was the signal every guerrilla had waited for. Hell erupted. Frank and Jesse opened fire from the ravine, their rifles cracking in rapid succession. Union soldiers who'd positioned themselves west of the house suddenly realized they were being shot from behind, the direction they'd believed was secure. Men screamed, fell, scrambled for cover that didn't exist. Archie's rifle spoke again and again from the barn loft, each shot precisely aimed, each shot claiming a life. The small killer worked his lever action with mechanical efficiency, dropping Union soldiers who'd thought the barn was empty and safe. Dave Poole killed 3 men in 5 seconds at the fence line, his revolver spitting fire, bodies crumpling without sound beyond their dying gasps. Then Dave vanished into shadow, repositioning before return fire could find him. Jim Anderson and Cole Younger charged from the southern approach, cutting down the reserve cavalry, blocking retreat, turning the perimeter into a cage. Their revolvers roared continuously, muzzle flashes lighting the darkness in strobing horror. Bill Anderson exploded from the farmhouse front door, a revolver in each hand, firing before Union soldiers could react. He moved like violence incarnate, fluid, purposeful, absolutely lethal. Soldiers tried to bring weapons to bear, but Bill was faster, always faster, his bullets finding flesh and bone with terrible accuracy. The carefully planned military operation disintegrated into chaos and slaughter in seconds. Union soldiers who'd expected to capture one unsuspecting guerrilla instead found themselves trapped in crossfire from multiple directions, shot by enemies they couldn't see, dying in darkness without understanding what had gone wrong. Sergeant Danvers took a bullet through the throat, collapsing at Major Cross's feet, blood spraying across the Major's uniform. Cross spun, trying to comprehend what was happening, but his tactical mind couldn't process the impossible reality. He was surrounded. His men were dying. The trap had been reversed. "Fall back," Cross screamed. "Retreat to the road." But there was no retreat. Jim Anderson and Cole Younger held the southern route, killing anyone who ran that direction. The ravine held Frank and Jesse, pouring fire into soldiers who tried to escape west. Archie Clement's rifle commanded the north, making retreat toward Boonville a death sentence. Dave Poole haunted the eastern perimeter like a ghost, killing isolated soldiers with silent efficiency. Union soldiers broke, running in panic, and guerrillas hunted them through darkness. It wasn't warfare anymore. It was a massacre. Men died begging, died running, died without ever seeing who killed them. The night filled with screams, gunshots, desperate pleas for mercy that went unanswered. Major Cross fired wildly at shadows, his confidence shattered, his careful planning revealed as fatal arrogance. A bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him around. Another hit his thigh, dropping him to his knees. His revolver fell from nerveless fingers. Bill Anderson materialized from the smoke and darkness like death himself, covered in blood that wasn't his own, revolvers still smoking. He walked through carnage with measured steps, his boots splashing in spreading pools of blood, his face expressionless as stone. Cross looked up at his executioner and saw not a man but a force of nature, inevitable, implacable, absolutely merciless. You were supposed to be. We had surprise." "You had nothing," Bill said flatly. "You had arrogance. You came to kill my wife, Cross. You brought 40 men to surround my supper table. Did you really think I wouldn't know? Did you honestly believe I ever stop expecting death?" Around them, the shooting began to fade. 28 Union soldiers lay dead or dying. 8 more had surrendered, hands raised, begging for mercy. 4 had escaped into darkness, running hard for Boonville, their courage completely broken. The guerrillas began regrouping, checking bodies, executing wounded enemy soldiers with quick shots to the head. Bill grabbed Major Cross by the collar and dragged him toward the farmhouse. The major screamed as his wounded legs scraped across rough ground, leaving a trail of blood in the dirt. Bill felt nothing, no satisfaction, no anger, just cold purpose. Cross had come for Martha. Cross had planned to use Bill's wife as leverage to kill her if necessary. That decision carried consequences. "You wanted to catch me at supper," Bill said, his voice conversational as he hauled Cross up the farmhouse steps. "You wanted to trap me with my family. Well, Major, you got your wish. I was having supper, and now you're going to see what happens to men who threaten the few people I got left to love in this world." Frank James approached, Jesse behind him, both men unharmed. "We lost Dave Poole," Frank reported grimly. "Took 3 bullets holding the eastern perimeter. Died fast." Bill closed his eyes briefly. Dave Poole, silent, loyal, deadly Dave Poole, gone. Another name on the endless list of men who'd died following bloody Bill Anderson into impossible fights. And Samuel Tucker? Dead. Shot in the first seconds. 2 men lost. 28 enemies dead. The mathematics of guerrilla warfare written in blood. Bill looked at Major Cross, who was crying now, all dignity gone, reduced to a wounded animal understanding its death approached. "You killed 2 of my men tonight," Bill said quietly. "Good men. Better men than you could ever be. But you know what, Major? I ain't gonna kill you for that. I'm gonna kill you for the same reason you came here, because you made it personal. Bill dragged Cross into the farmhouse and threw him into the chair where Bill had been sitting minutes before, the chair visible through the window, the chair that had been bait in a trap that killed 40 men. Cross slumped in it, bleeding, weeping, his leg shattered, his shoulder torn open. You studied me, Bill continued, pulling out his scalping knife, the blade gleaming in lamplight. You tracked me. You learned my patterns. You thought you understood me. But you made one critical mistake, Major. You forgot that everything I do, every decision I make, is about protecting what little I have left, and you threatened that. Cross tried to speak, to beg, but terror choked his words. Bill leaned close, his face inches from Cross's, his voice dropping to a whisper. Your brother died at Centralia because he wore the uniform of an army that imprisoned my sisters in a building they knew was unsafe. Your brother died because Union forces decided civilian women were legitimate targets in this war. Your brother died because of choices made by men like you, men who believe authority makes them untouchable. Now you're gonna die for the same reason, because you believed you could come to my table, threaten my wife, and walk away. Outside, Archie Clement and the other guerrillas were stripping bodies of weapons and ammunition, checking pulses, executing survivors. The farmhouse yard had become an abattoir, corpses scattered like broken dolls, the smell of blood and gunpowder thick enough to taste. Bill stood over Major Nathan Cross and began the work of poetic justice, the blade moving with practiced efficiency, Cross's screams carrying into the night, unanswered and unmourned. The Major had come to capture Bill Anderson at supper with his family. Instead, he'd fed 40 men to the Missouri darkness and earned himself a death that would be whispered about in fearful voices for generations. The border war had claimed 40 more lives tonight. Before dawn, it would claim one more. Major Nathan Cross had stopped screaming, not because the pain had lessened, but because his voice had broken, reduced to wet gasping sounds that barely qualified as human. Bill Anderson worked with surgical precision, the scalping knife moving deliberately, each cut a statement of purpose. This wasn't rage. Rage burned hot and fast. This was justice, cold and methodical. Cross sat in the chair at the supper table, the same chair where Bill had sat as bait, the same table where Bill had eaten with Martha just 2 hours before. The symmetry was perfect and intentional. Cross had come to this table planning to terrorize Bill's family. Now Cross would die at it, experiencing every ounce of terror he'd intended to inflict. Please, Cross managed, the word bubbling through blood. His face had gone chalk white from blood loss, his body shaking uncontrollably. Please, I have family. Bill paused, the knife hovering. You have family? That's interesting, Major. Tell me, when you planned this raid, when you decided to come kill my wife, did you think about your family then? Did you consider what they'd think of you using a woman as bait? Cross's head lolled forward. He was fading fast, shock and blood loss dragging him toward darkness. Bill grabbed his hair, yanked his head back up, forced him to remain conscious. No, Major, you don't get to escape into death yet. You wanted to catch me at supper. You wanted to make me watch while you killed everything I love. Well, you're gonna stay awake and aware for every second of what happens next. Frank James stood in the doorway, his face grim. Bill, he's near gone. Finish it. Not yet, Bill said coldly. He turned to Archie Clement, who'd entered the farmhouse silently, his small frame radiating predatory energy. Archie, go wake up Elijah Garrett. Bring him here. I want him to see what betrayal costs. Archie smiled that dead smile and disappeared into the night. Minutes later, he returned, dragging Elijah Garrett, the farmer who'd sold Bill's location to Union forces. Garrett was in his nightshirt, barefoot, his face a mask of terror. He saw the carnage in his yard, 40 dead or dying Union soldiers, and his legs nearly gave out. Mr. Garrett, Bill said conversationally, still holding Cross's head up by the hair, I want you to look at Major Cross here. Look real close. This man came to your farm tonight because you told him I'd be here. You sent word to Boonville that Bloody Bill Anderson was having supper with his wife. You remember doing that, Mr. Garrett? Garrett stammered, words failing him, his entire body trembling. They threatened my family. They said they'd burn us out if you didn't betray me. Bill finished. I understand, Mr. Garrett. I truly do. Fear makes men do terrible things. But here's what you need to understand. Major Cross threatened your family if you didn't help him. I'm here because you did help him. So now you got a different problem. You got me. Bill released Cross's hair, letting the Major's head fall forward onto the blood-soaked table. Cross was barely breathing now, his life measured in seconds. Bill turned to face Garrett fully, his revolver still holstered but his hands resting on them casually. Your son Thomas is tied to a tree 2 miles from here, Bill continued. Frank found him carrying your message to Boonville. The boy was just doing what his daddy told him, so I didn't hurt him. But you, Mr. Garrett, you made a choice tonight. You chose Union threats over guerrilla trust. You chose to believe Cross would protect you. How'd that work out? Garrett fell to his knees, hands clasped in supplication. Please, Mr. Anderson, please. I got a wife. I got children. I was just trying to protect them. By killing me? Bill's voice remained flat, emotionless. By bringing 40 soldiers to murder my wife? That was your idea of protection? I didn't know what else to do. Garrett sobbed. They said they'd burn my farm, kill my sons. What was I supposed to do? Bill crouched down to Garrett's eye level. You were supposed to trust that I protect people who protect me. You were supposed to remember that I've kept Union forces from burning half the farms in this county because they know harboring guerrillas means I come calling. You were supposed to have faith, Mr. Garrett. Instead, you had fear, and fear makes men stupid. Jim Anderson entered, Cole Younger behind him. Yards cleared. We got 8 prisoners, all wounded. What you want done with them? Let them go, Bill said, standing. Strip them of weapons, boots, and uniforms. Send them back to Boonville in their underclothes. I want every Union soldier in Missouri to hear about tonight. I want them to know what happens when you come for my family. Bill turned back to Cross, whose breathing had become shallow and irregular. The major was minutes from death, maybe seconds. Bill leaned close to his ear and spoke softly, almost gently. Your brother Samuel died at Centralia because he chose to wear that uniform into guerrilla territory. You died tonight because you chose to make my wife a target. Both of you had choices, Major. Both of you chose wrong. I hope whatever God you believe in shows you more mercy than you showed to Missouri families these past 3 years. Cross's eyes fluttered, a final moment of awareness, then went vacant. His chest stopped moving. Major Nathan Cross, Union cavalry commander, died at the supper table he'd planned to turn into Bill Anderson's execution site. The poetic justice was complete. He'd come to terrorize a family at their table, and the table had claimed him instead. Bill stood, wiping his knife clean on Cross's uniform. He looked at Elijah Garrett, still kneeling, still weeping. Mr. Garrett, I'm not going to kill you tonight. You're going to live, and you're going to carry a message. You're going to tell every farmer, every sympathizer, every person in this county what happened here. You betrayed me, and 40 Union soldiers died because of it. Major Cross died because of it. Your farm is burned. We'll torch it before we leave. Your family can go to Boonville, beg Union protection. Maybe they'll treat you better than you treated me. My farm, Garrett whispered. That's everything I have. You should have thought about that before you sold me out, Bill replied without sympathy. Now get out of my sight before I change my mind about letting you live. Garrett scrambled to his feet and ran, stumbling in his nightshirt, disappearing into darkness. He'd live, but his life was destroyed, farm burned, reputation ruined, family dependent on the same Union forces that had coerced him into betrayal. It was a different kind of death, but death nonetheless. Bill walked outside into carnage. 28 Union soldiers lay dead in Garrett's farmyard. 8 more stood stripped to underclothes, wounded and humiliated, surrounded by guerrillas. Dave Poole's body had been laid out respectfully, his weapons arranged on his chest. Samuel Tucker lay beside him. 2 good men lost, but 40 enemies dead. The mathematics of guerrilla warfare. Archie, Bill called. Burn the house. Barn too. This place is compromised. Can't ever be used again. Make sure the prisoners watch. As flames began consuming Garrett's farmhouse, Bill supervised the placement of Major Cross's body. They dragged the major outside and propped him against the farm gate, still seated in the chair from the supper table, his ruined face visible in the firelight. Bill carved words into a wooden plank and nailed it above Cross's corpse. He came to my table uninvited. This is border hospitality. The 8 Union prisoners were forced to witness everything: the burning buildings, Cross's displayed corpse, the methodical efficiency of guerrilla operations. Then they were released, sent stumbling barefoot and half-naked toward Boonville, carrying stories that would grow with each retelling. Frank James approached Bill as the farmhouse collapsed in flames. We need to move. Union reinforcements will come at dawn. Bill nodded, but his eyes were distant. Dave Poole is dead because I stayed for supper. Sam Tucker is dead because I wanted one meal with my wife. 2 good men, Frank. How many more before this war ends? As many as it takes, Frank said quietly. You gave them a choice, Bill. They chose to follow you. Dave knew what he signed up for. So did Sam. Bill looked at the burning farmhouse, at Cross's corpse silhouetted against flames, at the scattered bodies of Union soldiers. Cross thought he could trap me. He studied me, tracked me, learned my patterns, but he forgot the most important thing. I never stopped being at war. Not during supper, not with my wife, never. That's what this war took from me, Frank. The ability to ever feel safe. Jesse James, his face streaked with powder burns, joined them. What you did tonight, they're going to tell stories about this. The night Bloody Bill turned a Union trap into a graveyard. Let them tell stories, Bill said flatly. Maybe it'll make the next Union officer think twice before coming after guerrilla families. The band mounted up, Dave Poole's body tied across his horse, heading south where Martha waited in the creek hollow. Behind them, Garrett's farm burned like a beacon, visible for miles. By dawn, news would reach Boonville. Major Cross dead, 40 soldiers massacred, Bloody Bill Anderson still alive and more dangerous than ever. So that's how it ended, folks. Hit subscribe, and tell me down below, where you watching from, and was Anderson right or wrong? I want to hear from you. 6 weeks later, Bill Anderson would die at Albany, Missouri, shot from ambush by Union militia. But the supper ambush remained his masterwork, a demonstration that on the Missouri border, survival belonged to the perpetually vigilant, the ruthlessly prepared, and those who understood that every meal might be their last. Cross came for Bill at his table, expecting easy victory. Instead, he fed his entire detachment to the prairie darkness and earned himself a death that Missouri would remember long after the war ended. The border war had many terrible lessons. Bill Anderson taught the worst one that night. Never mistake a guerrilla's moment of peace for weakness. Behind every supper table, every quiet moment, every appearance of vulnerability, Bill Anderson remained exactly what 2 years of war had forged him into. A calculating killer who turned traps into slaughterhouses and made enemies pay in blood for every mistake they made. Major Cross's final mistake was believing Bill Anderson could ever be caught off guard. 40 men learned that lesson too late. The prairie remembered their screams long after the fires died down.